Now let's wrap this chapter up by learning one final useful skill. If we have two numbers, we can find their AM and we can find their GM. But can we do things in reverse? If we have the AM and the GM, can we find the numbers? Let's learn how to do that using a few examples. If AM and GM of roots of a quadratic equation are 8 and 5 respectively, then find the quadratic equation. Pause the video, give this a shot. So let's do this together. We're given the AM and GM and we have no clue about the numbers themselves. So let's assume that the numbers are A and B. Let the roots be A and B. Because the AM and GM are given for the roots of this equation, so let the roots be A and B. Now if the AM is 8, we can say that A plus B by 2 is 8. And if the GM is 5, we can say that root AB that's equal to 5. How can we find the quadratic equation from these two? Here are two clues. A plus B that's equal to the sum of the roots, and AB that's equal to the product of the roots. Did you figure it out? Okay, let's continue. A plus B is 16, that's the sum of roots, and AB that's 5 square, that's 25, that's the product of roots. And if we know the sum of roots and product of roots, we can actually form the equation without getting to the values of A and B. So how do you find the quadratic equation? That's x square minus sum of roots into x plus product of roots. So the equation becomes x square minus 16 into x plus 25 equals to 0. This is the equation that we were looking for. Let's solve one more problem. If AM and GM of two positive numbers are 10 and 8 respectively, then find the numbers. Pause the video, try it out. It's very similar to the one that we have just solved. Okay, so let's do this. Let the numbers be A and B. So A plus B by 2, that's 10. AM is given as 10. And root AB, that's equal to 8. And we can do the same thing. We can have the sum of numbers and product of numbers. Sum of numbers A plus B, that's 10 times 2, that's 20. And product of numbers, that's AB, that's the square of 8, that's 64. Now, this question doesn't want us to find the quadratic equation whose roots are A and B. But if we do that, we'll get the equation. And if we get the equation, we can solve it to get the values of A and B. So let's follow that approach. Let's assume that these two are actually the roots of this quadratic equation. What will that quadratic equation look like? Well, it will look something like this. X square minus 20x plus 64. 20 is the sum of roots and 64 is the product of roots. And now we can solve this equation to get the values of A and B. So let's solve this by splitting the middle term. X square minus 20x plus 64. 20 can be broken down into 16 and 4. So x square minus 4x minus 16x plus 64, that's 0. Taking x common and 16 common, we get x times x minus 4 minus 16 times x minus 4. Taking x minus 4 common, we get x minus 4 times x minus 16, that's 0. Now if these two multiplied give us 0, x is either 4 or 16. So the roots are 4 and 16. And that's it. If we know the AM and GM of two numbers, this is the method that we can use to find the numbers themselves.